I had managed to keep a healthy skepticism of ghosts, ghouls, and all things supernatural until I was 28. I found most claims of such things to be doubtful at best and harmful at worst. I was very much in the camp of the classical sciences that I had studied physics at Edinburgh University several years earlier. While my profession was never taken me back to the scientific arena, I had until this time maintained a ruthless opposition to pseudo science and superstition. My friends often wonder about the change they saw in me at that time. What surprised them was that it wasn't a slow, steady change of heart, but rather a complete turnaround overnight. A transformation, if you will. It may have appeared as it occurred very so quickly, but in fact it happened over a slightly longer time scale, 2 weeks to be precise. It was February. In fact, it was the week of Valentine's Day. Around this time, I was going through a socially isolated phase. It's something which often happens in the bleak of Scottish winters, where I become increasingly wrapped up in my own loneliness and passing bitterness at those who fit in. It was, and still is, a neurotic hangover from my teenage years, one which managed to plague me for far too long. 2 weeks earlier, I had found myself wandering through the cobblestone streets of Edinburgh to clear my head. While walking is as amusing as it may seem, it has always been a great comfort to me. You are, in every sense, alone with your thoughts, but that part of you which craves the company of others is slightly appeased by the being in the world, even if you're only in it long enough to share a glance with the passing stranger. Edinburgh is a very old city and has remarkably kept much of its former self. The cobblestone streets meander down the steep side of what was once a volcano, breaking off sporadically into narrow lanes which occasionally open up to secluded courtyards. These numerous courtyards are often flanked by all sides by tall traced houses, huddled together as if whispering of a secret and long forgotten past. The impressiveness of Edinburgh as the city is often lost on those who have lived there long enough to find beauty commonplace. As often happens when gripped by depression, I hadn't been sleeping well. I had finished work the previous evening around 5 p.m., and while I managed to get a few hours sleep, my mind wouldn't let me relax. Come 6 in the morning, even though it was Sunday and I could for once have a long lie, I conceded defeat in my attempts to have a proper rest and got up to greet the world, however reluctantly. By the time I had set off, it was still early in the morning, and the cold January air stung my face, although Edinburgh was, for what want a better expression, a tourist city. By that time, it still seemed relatively deserted, even for a Sunday. A slight mist had risen out of the water of Leith, making it feel like a little more colder as I passed through the narrow lanes down the empty pavements, entirely oblivious to where I was going. As the shops opened, the first trickle of the tourists bled out onto the cobbled walkways from their hotels. I deliberately headed for a quieter, often forgotten network of streets. My wandering mind has indeed taken over, for as far as I broke through the haze of the daydream, I found myself standing at the gates of an old graveyard. I had been thinking about turning back and heading back home, but something about this place awoke a compulsion in me. I had to explore it. I found it curious that the gates, constructed out of blackened steel rods, were lying unlocked as in the early day as this is. Entering the cemetery, I immediately noticed the overall isolation of the place, enjoying the sound of the gravel under my feet which pierced the silence. I moved slowly along the path littered with small white stones. It wasn't a large graveyard. It seemed to be consist of two separate plots, with the older graves on the front bordering the fence and gate, filling backwards up to a diminutive nearby hill where more recently deceased residents lay. The oldest graves, that bore the weathered scars of age, I found one which was dated 1776, but the alphabet was illegible. I felt a sadness staring down at my head at the headstone, wondering about who it belonged to, and indulgently contemplating about myself as forgotten or lost soul. Eventually, I moved off, wandering up the hill towards the newer graves. I found myself drawn to a large old sycamore tree which loomed over several graves below it. With most protective demeanor, I stared at one of the headstones, reading the words, not registering them, as my mind was engulfed by yet another daydream. The grave stood out somewhat from those around it. The headstone was white in color, while those which accompanied it were forged out of deep black marble. Without thinking, I ran my head over the smooth stone, feeling the occasional mark of the elements upon it. At the foot of the headstone lay a small inertious vase. It was made out of brownish metal, copper I assumed, as the surface exhibited its small veins, in which they were blue color due to the exposure of the weather. As I stood there, something rose out of my mind, something which bothered me greatly. At first I did not know what it was, experiencing it as merely a low, growing sense of discomfort. As this feeling of unease reached a crescendo, I suddenly realized what was wrong. The name on the grave was Lisa Main. I knew that name very well. Everyone in the local area did. I had known her when I was growing up, as we went to the same school together. She was someone that I watched from afar, full life and exuberance. While I was shy, reclusive, and reserved, I possessed that intense infatuation and desire of her which only for a first love can produce. The words on her headstone came to a sharp focus. Age 15. I was overcome with tremendous sense of grief and loss. One she took me entirely by surprise. So much that I had to leave that in place. I couldn't just bear it. As someone who prides himself on being level-headed and immune to the flights of fancy, I could not shake the profound unease which often comes with outrageous coincidence. I exited out the graveyard as quickly as possible and headed home, ignoring how the cluttered Edinburgh streets. I did not look back. Over the following few days or so I was preoccupied. I was overworked and having trouble sleeping, but was not unusual for me. What was unusual was the immovable thoughts and memories of Lisa Main, thoughts which now stayed with me wherever I go. I had been terribly affected by her death, as we were only 15 at the time, but that was over a decade ago and I had not thought of her for many years. It was as if seeing that gravestone had awoken a sense of loss, a sense of pain which I had managed to bury so far deep inside me that I had to persuade even to myself to forget it. The counterpony of memories now haunted me, beautiful and terrifying. At one moment I would be accelerated by the thought of her smile, her hair, her kindness, and the very next engulfed by despair and image of her lying under 6 feet of earth, cold and alone. Once full of life, now decaying husk, which had long ago housed that beautiful soul. If I had told anyone of how I felt, they would have to call me overly emotional or sentimental, for the fact that remained, barely knew Lisa. Watching her for years across the room, I imagined myself talking with her, staring and sharing all those intoxicating moments which mean so much to a teenager. The first connection with someone you adore, the first feeling of being loved, the first kiss. I, in fact, hardly ever spoken to her until only a few weeks before she died, in one of those embarrassing maneuvers which teachers often pull. The pupils were forcibly all partnered with someone to take our first social dance. Social dancing was a torrid affair. For someone like Lisa, it was fun and to be enjoyed, while for me it was something to be detested. I was embarrassed, possessing wanted the talent to be a dancer, and even more so afraid to spend time with a girl, held back by my own teenage awkwardness. It was at the end of January, and Lisa quickly set me at ease in social dancing class where we practice. I cannot convey the simultaneous sense of joy and fear, which I felt when she asked me to walk her home that day. Some people find social interactions to be exhausting, much like myself, always worried about saying the wrong thing. But some individuals can set others at ease with the smallest of effort. Lisa was one of those people. As we walked across the Elegancy Victorian Bridge towards her house, the winter sun bathed our surroundings in a cool, comforting glow. I couldn't have been more content to be in the presence of this happy, kind-hearted girl. She was so beautiful in an incredible smile and golden locks of hair, which seemed more at home in the fairy tale than our surroundings. For weeks we talked about the same route home every day, talking, laughing, something I rarely did, and growing even closer. When you're at that age, everything is so potent. You could almost fall in and out of love in a heartbeat. I didn't have that many friends, and I lived alone with my mother, who was not practically affectionate woman. So at that short of time, I fell in love with Lisa Maine. On the 13th of February, we stopped outside her house. We stood there talking for a moment when the first time Lisa became distant. She stared straight at me in a way that she had never done before. I felt uneasy yet exhilarated there for a moment, a tiny moment where we said nothing to each other. Then she hugged me. Her fingers slid through my hair. I would never forget how sweet she smelled, how alive she felt, and how grateful I was to someone for showing me a kindness that I had never previously known. Lisa slowly letting go of me and skipped up to her front door. Just before she disappeared, she turned to smile at me one more time. Then she was gone. Immediately, I knew what I was going to do. For the first time in my life, I was a full purpose and focus, a desire to do one thing. I ran as far as I could to the local shops. I was lucky most of them were shutting up for the day. The kind old man who ran rarely a used card store allowed me into his shop, even though he was just closing. I was going to buy my first Valentine's card. It had to be perfect. It had to be just right. After looking at almost every card I could afford, I found one. It was Fate. The card was red with a white circle in the middle. In that circle was a boy and a girl, walking hand in hand into the distance together. I did not care what it said inside, because I've always had a way with written words, and I knew I could put something down which came from the heart. I bought it, and of course, first when I decided to buy it. After leaving the card shop, I went straight to my local news segments, and I had kept aside my last £2. My mom gave me an allowance to buy my lunch at school every week, and I knew she would not give me more than I should spend it. Despite it meaning I would have to go without lunch for a few days, I bought a box of chocolates to accompany the card. I rushed home, walked upstairs past my mother, who barely greeted me, grabbed a pair of scissors from my kitchen, and went upstairs. I knew I would get into unbelievable amount of trouble for it, but I didn't care. I cut the sliver of material from the red curtains hanging from my mother's room and tied a makeshift ribbon around the box of chocolates. In my mind, it now looked like a Valentine's Day gift. I wrote on the card explaining how I felt about Lisa and how much those walks home had meant to me. Signed it, sealed it in an envelope, and slid it under the ribbon so it sat nicely with the chocolates. I waited for the next day. It all came too slowly. The 14th of February, I will never forget the excitement of getting ready for school. I took one last look at the chocolates in the card before slipping them into my bag. I think I made it a little too obvious that I was carrying something important and delicate, as I cradled the whole bag in my arms for most of the day. I was so exhausted, so focused that I was going to march straight up to Lisa and give her the gift without a care for what the others, some of whom could be very cruel, would think. But she was not there. She wasn't in the playgrounds. She wasn't in her classes. For the subjects we shared, I sat and stared at her empty desk and chair. School finished, and I found myself walking the same route Lisa and I normally would. I stood outside her house, holding the chocolates. I can't describe the feeling I experienced there. Call it the effects of a lack of food or exhaustion, of having been so primed for the day. but anxiety took me as a result. I couldn't bring myself to knock on their door. I went home dejected, so I couldn't eat a bite of the undercooked ham my mom had threw in front of me, so I simply went upstairs and crawled into bed, barely sleeping all night. For the next 2 days, I walked that same route and found myself holding on to those chocolates, not daring to cross the threshold of the little white fence in front of Lisa's house. On the third day, I asked our teachers about Lisa's absence, something which hadn't just occurred to me to do. I associated my authority with being cold and distant and unfair as a result of normally avoided contact with my teachers at any cost. Mr. Randall, our history teacher, told me that Lisa had come down with a bad fever and she was very ill. She could be off for weeks. With this news, I was going to knock on her door, and knock on her door is just what I did. I knocked and knocked and knocked, but no one answered. The next day, I did the same, and again, no one answered. Now it had been 5 days since I last saw Lisa. It was a Saturday, and once again, I went over to Lisa's house, chocolates and card in hand. As I approached her house, the sky clouded over, casting a dull hue over Lisa's seemingly deserted street. It was clear to see that Lisa's father was not a gardener. The garden path split overgrown and patchy lawn with two clambering weeds stretching up towards the sun through numerous cracks in the concrete slabs. I stopped to look around and focus my gaze on what seemed to be a smallish gnome figurine smothered in undergrowth. It had sadly been broken. Many suggestive that when something's wrong, a person knows. They may not be aware of precisely what has happened, but that they can almost feel a palpable sense of dread in the air. I looked around and continued towards the front door. Something was different. I was sure that the house had seemed deserted as had been the previous days I had visited it, and while the house was, in for all intents and purposes, exactly the same as before, there was one change. The front door was open. I was convinced that it had been shut when I arrived, but I dismissed this as simply by product of my fascination with the condition of Lisa's garden. You see, I can't quite explain it, but there was something suffocating about that house on a quiet street. I reached the door, grasped the door knocker, clapping 3 times, no answer. I repeated my knocks more forcefully this time, but still no one came. The door was only slightly ajar, as such I couldn't really see much of the interior. All I could tell was that the house was dark and that the air escaping through the doorway was musty. As if nothing had stirred inside for days, I started to feel nervous. I really didn't know why. Clearing my throat and stammering slightly, I asked, "Hello?" several times without answer. The street was empty and the whole place felt devoid of life. Then a thought began to ruminate and gather momentum within me. What if Lisa and her father were hurt? I started to play out all the possibilities in my mind. The two of them lying somewhere in the house, injured without food or water for days. Then I remembered that my history teacher said that Lisa was ill. He must have spoken to someone who knew this, probably Lisa's father. I hoped that she was not too sick, so sick that her father had taken her to the hospital. Despite the logic of my thoughts, I could still not miss the horrible feeling that something was indeed wrong. Fear began to grip me, yet I closed my eyes for only a moment and found the memory of Lisa's embrace all the solstice. I needed to overcome it. I held on tightly to the chocolates and flowers as I pushed the door forcefully open. It moved silently, but I was sure the noise of it hitting the doorstep on the floor would alert anyone to my presence, as the bang echoed through the house, but still no one came. The house was bathed in darkness. I took one last look around me and crossed the threshold. While Lisa did not overcome that affluent family, the house had an upstairs, and it must have had at least 4 bedrooms with an attic. Perhaps the fact that Lisa was the only child made the house seem all the larger or emptier. But as I was slowly making my way down the hallway, I felt as each footstep echoed throughout the distant passages and rooms. Beginning with the living room on the ground floor, I moved from room to room occasionally, asking if someone could hear me, but I quickly became aware that I was only talking to myself. The air was stiffeningly hot, and running my hand across the radiator, I realized that the boiler must have been on for some time. As I moved to the kitchen at the rear of the house, I heard something. It was almost rhythmic, dull thudding. I couldn't identify what it was, but I knew it was something coming from somewhere upstairs. I left the kitchen, which I was glad to do so, as it was filled with the smell of rotting food, and walked to the foot of the stairs. The staircase was quite narrow and ran along the inside of the wall. At the top of the stairs was a landing, which carved around to the left and led me to the other rooms. The dull thudding was now more pronounced as I slowly climbed up the stairs. The same fear which had gripped me at the door returned. The realization of wandering into someone's house uninvited came to the fore. Stopping for a moment, I closed my eyes, and the thought of Lisa again. I continued on. As I continued to reach the top of the stairs, the thudding noise stopped. I shuddered now, even just thinking of it. There were 3 open doors leading to the other bedrooms, and one leading to the bathroom, which I could already see was empty. The door to the first bedroom lay open. I peered in slowly, almost expecting to find someone there. There was no one. It was Lisa's father's room, neat, organized, and with almost no objects of any note. The only curiosity was that the curtains were not drawn. The door to the second room was closed again. As I overcame with a sense of intrusion, I was walking around inside someone's house without invitation. In effect, I was a trespasser. I knocked on the door quietly, waiting for a moment. I realized the room must be empty, and turned to brass the handle on the door. As it opened, as I pushed the door, it creaked and then suddenly stopped after only a few mere inches of movement. Something was behind the door. I pulled it towards me and then pushed again, but with no luck. With each attempt, the wooden door bashed off something. I suddenly became aware of the noise I was making as each attempt echoed throughout my house. It was not a dissimilar to the thudding that I heard before. I had tried one more time, pushing against the obstacle as hard as I could. No luck. I was about to give up and move on to the next door when I saw what was blocking my entrance. I will never forget the cold, glassy stare of the face, which seemed to be peeking out from behind the bottom of the door. A skin paled gray, a few retreating locks of hair covering up otherwise the balding head, goblets of sweat congealed under. Most of its features were obscured by the door, but the only visible eye was still starred and clouded and covered in shadow. I didn't scream, because I quickly realized that not only was the face of Lisa's father, but he was in a very pretty much dead. I felt numb, but looking back, I realized I had handled the situation much more calmly than many of my age would have. But when I did a strange fascination for such things, reading many accounts of quite horrific death scenes. I stared for a moment to compose myself, and then instantly turned to the thoughts of Lisa, where she might be. She was in the same room? Was she in the attic? All I could hope for was that she was okay. Something then happened, which event I have to this day repressed, ignored, and avoided as much as I possibly could. Something which shook me to the core. Something which I had never told a soul. The face staring up at me, that gloom-filled gap in the doorway, moved. At first it was only the slight, and I disregarded it as the effects of the shock. Then it moved again. Suddenly the door began to shake violently, as if being punched and kicked by the body lying behind it. The head turned upwards, and the cracking of rigor mortis hurts from the neck struggled against each sharp and vicious movement. A perturbed gurgling sound gasped out. It ranged from the deep within its bloated throat. I closed my eyes. I was sure it was not real. The banging stopped, and the house fell once again into silence. I let out a sigh of relief and opened my eyes, and what I saw I can barely describe now. The face had moved upwards from behind the door to be laid level with mine. The door shook and rattled under the strain as its venomous attacker tried to claw and batter its way through. Finally, the face pushed and squeezed through the gap in the door, revealing its repulsively loathsome features into the entirety. Dead, swollen with clotted blood, gasping relentlessly for air, all at the time staring straight at me for the hate-filled eyes with the lips pulled back over teeth gritted together, grinding together against one and the other, were wrenched in hatred. I do not remember much of what took that place after that. Perhaps I'm glad to. I know I escaped, and I know that I ran home confused, crying, babbling like a madman. I also know one more thing. While the memory has been pushed so deep inside that I can barely recognize it, I know whatever was in that room slipped through the gap in the doorway. It slipped through and grabbed me. How I escaped, I do not know. The truth was more horrifying than I could have imagined. Lisa's father had lost his job a couple of weeks earlier, and as Bill's mounting compliance of pressures of looking after his only child, he snapped. When the police entered the house, they found a poor sweet Lisa's body in the cellar. Her wrists were tied to the radiator. She had been strangled to death. After killing his daughter, Lisa's father then went upstairs and hanged himself in her room. After a few days of hanging there, the cord he had used to choke himself, the life from him, seemed to have snapped. The police found his body slumped behind the bedroom door. The door was open. At this enrolled memory, the explanation of these events altered greatly. Though my years of study at school and then university, I have read psychological pressures and how trauma could bring out about vivid hallucinations. I had convinced myself that I had found Lisa's father dead, and that shock that I had produced from the rest of the experience. No matter how real it felt, the idea of the corpse twisted by rage and hate, perhaps even by the love I felt for his daughter, could somehow come back to life and attack the living, just did not fit in with my scientific and enthusiastic understanding of the world. I dismissed the entire experience, but one thing that still managed to haunt me until I managed to hide it from myself. The police reported that Lisa had been tied up for a couple of days before she was killed. Her date of death was recorded as the 15th of February. She had been in that cellar, tied up, frightened, yet alive when I had come by yet to give her Valentine's Day gift. People talk about hauntings and spirits, but the memory of that contorted face rising up through the doorway was nothing compared to the knowledge that had I went to her house that day. That maybe, just maybe, I could have saved her. Yes, I was a child, but I could have done something. I grew up but never felt that love again, feeling of that connection with some other human being, as I developed an unhealthy attachment to my own company and had found myself even more interested in burying my head in textbooks than perhaps meeting the others or even falling in love. The friends I have had, they were never that close to me, nor did they ever truly understand who I was. Seeing Lisa's grave brought out all the floating back to me. Those stolen moments, that thing in the house, her death, the funny thing of all those memories, both traumatic and precious. The one thought which would have not leave me was the thought of the Valentine's Day gift I never gave. While I still hoped that dead thing in Lisa's house was with my own imagination, and that the world was still very much material, lacking in the spiritual, I still felt the need to rectify this. I had kept the card in all those years. In many ways, it was both my cherished and loathed possession. Cherished all the memories it drew up from within me, and loathed for the same reason. On the morning on the 14th, I walked through the cobbled streets of Edinburgh towards Lisa's resting place. On the way, I stopped by a few new agents and picked up a box of chocolates. On my first visit, I had wandered there by accident, vaguely negotiating each street in a daze, but this time I was focused and resolute. Statement is a curious thing, and it had encouraged me to keep not only the card, but also the ribbon I had made for the chocolates. When I entered the graveyard, I gazed up towards that lonely hill where she lay. I felt hesitant, not because I did not want to leave the gifts by her graveside, but the more so because I did not want to know the extent to which the feelings of remorse, sad, and bitter nostalgia would overcome me again. Nevertheless, I took my moment and then made my way up over the whitened path, up towards the hill, up towards her. I stood, The sun was still relatively low in the sky as it cast long, contorted, and exaggerated shadows over everything. After standing there for what seemed like an age, I pulled out the ribbon, tied it carefully around the box, and then placed the chocolates and the card against the cold headstone. I don't know if I said anything. At the time I probably didn't, as I was still convinced that she wasn't there to hear me. That once your loved one passes away, they are gone forever. That death is the end. I do know that I cried, and I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. I fell to my knees and buried my head in my hands. I was inconsolable. Those moments of utter sadness, utter despair, and the cruelness of life, of what it had done to beautiful Lisa, where I last had as a true septic. For as I knelt there, the wind blew gently through the graveyard, gently caressing those stone markers of loss and those who had tended them. I heard and read about people having religious or spiritual experience, and while I cannot truly accept the others' testimonies, I can definitely say that what I felt at that moment was profound, an archingly beautiful feeling of companionship and love. I looked around, no one was there, but I felt that someone was. I tried to shake that feeling off as my mind simply playing tricks on me, but no matter how much I tried to stick to that interpretation of events, I simply could not do it. That feeling shared a twin emotion. I had ever once only felt this way before. When Lisa hugged me for the last time I saw her, as a sensation washed over me, I realized that I had truly been searching for that same feeling again, but never found it until that moment. I stood up, wiped my eyes, and touched the gravestone as if to say goodbye. I walked to the graveyard entrance with a smile which stretched from ear to ear, something anyone knows me well will tell you extremely unusual. When I reached the gate, I glanced up one more at that hill, which to me was no longer a sight of loneliness, but one of love and friendship. The last and second time I can say I have ever seen a ghost was that moment, for standing up on a hill beside Lisa's grave was the blurry image of a young girl in a pink social dancing dress. I did not run to the grave because I knew I did not have to. She waved slowly at me and then disappeared behind her gravestone. I walked home. I felt full, joyful, and exuberant. It's almost impossible to describe that one experience by the graveside. Perhaps the completeness will do for now, but even that cannot convey it. Friends wonder what happened to me around that time. The truth is that I found something I did not know was missing. Some reading this may think that I found my faith, but it was not like that at all. What I found that day was companionship and acceptance from the only person I had ever truly loved. I knew from that day onwards was the world was far more mysterious and wonderful place than I could ever possibly imagine. I knew that I would never fear being alone, for when I go wandering through the streets of Edinburgh to find myself on a quiet stretch of road, I smile to myself knowing that if I could listen carefully, I can hear the footsteps of Lisa, that girl I loved so dearly when I was a child, walking with me wherever I go.